Hi, everybody. This week we are focusing on feminist theologies, and you'll notice I'm using the plural there, and we will talk about why in a little bit. All right. So instead of using a book this week, I opted for a number of articles and book chapters instead. The chapter that you have from Rosemary Radford Ruther gives you a really good general overview of the field. I'm going to talk about her a little bit in my next video. The Nolan Carter reading has little excerpts from different theologians, feminist theologians. The article from Grant is an early work of womanist theology. All right, and then I have another video up for you to watch that provides a great background about the development of womanist theology at Union Seminary in New York, which was really a hot spot in kind of the development of this theological field. And you'll also notice that I have a bunch of optional things for you to do this week up on the Moodle page. This is an area of specialty for me. So I've included things that I use in my women's history class, just in case you're curious, and then just some other interesting materials that you can go deeper with if you want to, but don't feel like you have to. All right, I just wanted to note that before we get going. All right, so in this video, I'm going to give you just a little bit of background before we get into feminist theology. I'm just going to talk a little bit about second wave feminists and how, and kind of that atmosphere in which feminist theology is coming into being. All right. And then how this movement impacts theology, how it impacts the church. Okay. Now, I want to note that the fight for women's rights did not start in the 1960s and the 70s, all right? Already in 1666, Margaret Fell publishes a tract on women's rights. Mary Wollstonecraft has a widely distributed treaty called The Vindication of the Rights of Women, published in 1792. Sarah Grimke wrote the Letters on the Equality of the Sexes and the Condition of Women in 1838. Okay, the first Women's Rights Convention was in 1848, which is largely considered kind of the start of the women's rights movement as a political force. And then, of course, in 1920 was a huge win for women, where women gained the right to vote in the United States. And that actually did make quite a bit of difference in the life of women. All right, so you can see, like, this isn't just something that's bubbling up. All right, here's a long history. Heck, I mean, you have women writing, in the medieval ages too. All right, so oftentimes you'll see kind of a jump between like 1920 with the passing of universal suffrage to the 1970s. That's also not real accurate either. There was plenty of things happening within that period. There's a lot more kind of a global push in there. And women's rights and the fight for women's rights are going to look different depending on context, all right? One prime example that I like to give is the divergent views of women on how, kind of what feminism is, what women's rights is, depending on context within the Americas. There was this group, the InterAmerican Commission of Women, which was founded in 1928 to unite women across the Americas. However, as it turns out, women across the Americas had very different ideas about what feminism was. And you actually have American feminist leaders like Doris Stevens in open conflict with other feminist leaders from other areas, in this case, a woman named Ofelia Dominguez Navarro from Cuba, over what tactics are, what feminism looks like. For Stevens, women's rights is very much like political rights. And for somebody like Dominguez Navarro, she is arguing that actually, in her context, where they're being crushed under American imperialism, she argued that feminism was something broader than political rights. It involved economic justice and political and civil rights for all people. Okay, so we're seeing this kind of conflicting viewpoints on what it means to be a feminist based on context pretty early on. And of course, we are focusing on America, but I just do want to note that there is a lot of variance in viewpoints. All right, so In many ways, the civil rights movements of the 1950s and the 60s is influencing this development of this new wave of feminist activity in the 1960s and the 1970s within the United States. Okay, this wave is often called second wave feminism, the women's liberation movement. These are different terms that can kind of be used interchangeably. The first wave being that original push in the 19th century for voting rights. Though that's a bit of an anachronism, and I usually don't use the term. I never actually use the term first wave feminism, but anyway, that's where the term second wave feminism is coming from. Okay, so in general, the women's liberation movement of the 60s and 70s is concerned with women gaining equal rights and opportunities within society. Okay, some more specific issues will include like equal pay for equal work, or fighting against domestic violence and sexual violence, reproductive rights, things like that. And so why is this bubbling up kind of right then in the 60s and the 70s? First, of course, I mentioned there is influence from the civil rights movement, all right? But then also women are gaining access to education. Women are more represented in the workforce. And women also have access to more reliable contraceptives. Okay, and this, of course, has a huge impact on whether women decide to have children, how many children they have, and of course, this influences education and career goals. Now, I do want to spend a moment on contraceptives because this was a really huge issue then. And as you know, all things reproductive rights is a pretty big issue right now as well. The first birth control pill hit the market in 1960. Okay, so you'll notice there is definitely, I don't know if causation, but definitely some correlation between these events. Okay. The pill did very, very well. However, religious groups struggled in how to react about them. Okay, more liberal Christian denominations tended to accept contraceptives without issue, though obviously within the confines of marriage. The Catholic Church came down hard against them, and it remains controversial today. And it's well known that many, many Catholics sort of just ignore this teaching of the church. Evangelical Christians landed somewhere in between, debates centered around whether single women should be able to obtain contraceptives, for example, and there's a lot of skepticism too, all right? There was concerns about how contraceptives would change marriage, how it would change society, all right? And of course, really none of these debates comes close to the contention surrounding kind of the issue of abortion and Roe versus Wade from 1973. All right, you might be thinking at this point, wow, has anything changed over the last 50 years? I don't know. Things keep cycling back in American history. I will say that. All right. In the next video, I'm going to talk more about the development of these feminist theologies. All right. Thanks, everybody. Bye.